Hello everyone and welcome to When Life Changes podcast with me, Di Parker, the Good Grief Coach. Today my guests are from Organ Donation, Isle of Man, the gift of life, Pam Macon, retired critical care nurse, and Diane Taylor, whose son Daniel passed away and was the inspiration in these two amazing ladies coming together and help change the law on the Isle of Man from an opt-in to an opt-out, which is also known as Daniel's Law. So today I'm going to go and have a nice conversation with these ladies because I know there's a lot of questions that have been put to me about what actually happens, and these ladies are the experts to help guide us through all of this process. So thank you so much, girls, for coming along and taking the time out today to be with us. So the first thing I want to talk about really is the legislation journey itself. What inspired that in you to take that law on?
Well, I don't think it was us personally, was it? From when I remember when we started doing this, the way to sign on the Organ Donation Register on the Isle of Man was mainly done on the driving licence. But that threw up its own problems because it wasn't linked to the NHSBT, the National Register. And to be able to do that, there was going to be an awful lot of work and an awful lot of money to be able to do that. So it was actually Martin Perkins that started the ball rolling by bringing a private member's bill to Tynwald many years ago to start the ball rolling to get the change done. And the registration, or where you would sign up on your driving licence, that option went because it stopped on your driving licence. And unless you carried your driving licence with you all the time and had an accident, or it was a weekend and that department was shut, nobody would actually know what you'd signed up to only on your driving licence. So it made sense to start the change in the law and encourage everyone to go and sign on the National Register. There's one register for the whole of the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Jersey, Guernsey, Ireland. So by doing what they've done, everybody now, when they do go and sign on, will be on that register, and that is whether they opt in or they opt out.
So what was it like from your end, being behind the scenes in the hospital before the legislation was changed?
Beforehand, we would normally, if patients did come into the intensive care unit, because normally to be a donor you're more likely to be in intensive care on a ventilator called a breathing machine. I just want to stress that we would do everything we can to save that person's life. It's only when, it became futile that we would then consider organ donation. First thing, if somebody, when they come into hospital, we would do a property list and a valuables list. And one of the things we would document would be whether they've got bank cards, driver's license, whether they had an organ donor card on them. And if the time did come that, it was futile and a discussion was going to take place, we would get in touch with the specialist nurses for organ donation in the UK. In the Northwest, we have our own one that visits the island, and they come across every month. And we would get in touch with the team there and say that we had a potential donor, and then they would ask us a series of questions, and if they felt it was feasible, they would come to the island and they would approach the family because they're the experts and there might be questions asked. So that did take a bit of time, but there's thing that the specialists for organ donation, we call them SNODs for short, would do. They would check the register. So if somebody didn't have a card, they could check the register to see whether somebody was on the register. And that means if they were, when they spoke to the family, it made the approach much easier because we knew the patient's wishes.
Yeah. Okay. So those were the obstacles that you were faced with, is getting people to sign up for to donate their organs. What was the story and inspiration, though, to with Daniel and everything that happened with Daniel, for you to step up and do this yourself?
I think definitely to find yourself in a position that Daniel's dad and I were, where 1 minute you've got a healthy son, healthy family, 3 children, and to all of a sudden, within 24 hours of an accident, which even then you think he's going to be fine, to being told that he's actually, brain dead, and it's only the ventilator keeping him alive. Had we thought about organ donation? I was brought up, my mum was a senior nurse at Ramsey Cottage Hospital. She trained in her late teens and her whole life was nursing. And up until Daniel's accident, which was 2007, and bearing in mind then I think I was 41, organ donation had never been talked about in our family. Mum had never brought it up, which look back now, for a nurse to not bring it up. And when we came back from Pendlebury Children's Hospital after Daniel had passed away, and I told Mum, the first thing I said was we'd donated his organs, and Mum was so pleased. And obviously not at that point, it kind of, things started going on in my head, because at that point it was just, you can't believe that it's even happened. So it was around 3 or 4 years later, and we'd had letters from a couple of the families, but I had questions, as to, we'd agreed Daniel's heart could be used for medical research because they couldn't find a match in time. And I suddenly wanted to know, well, did they use it? Where was it? So that led on to, we had contact number for somebody at Children's Hospital. And in fact, it probably was one of the snods, Daniel's snod, who was Lee, because I wanted to find out more. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it starts thinking, well, why had we never thought about it? We knew 99.9% that Daniel would have agreed, and that a month later after the accident, or 7 weeks later, Daniel would have been getting his provisional licence and would have signed it himself. So I had a meeting with Daniel's specialist nurse, who was Lee, and her and Abby, who's the specialist nurse for the North West and covers the Isle of Man, came over, and I spent about 3 or 4 hours with them in the intensive care unit actually at Nobles in one of the rooms. And all I wanted to know at that point was, had somebody been with Daniel? Because in the shock of it all, we all left the hospital before Daniel went down to theatre, because it felt, I can't give you a reason, because it didn't feel real. And Daniel's brother had come over, and my now husband was over. I'd gone over with Daniel's dad. Daniel's auntie came over, but my daughter and 2 grandchildren were at home. And I don't know, I decided not to stay, because I didn't actually know. It's all such a blur. Daniel was still on life support when we left the hospital, but we'd been told he had passed away. So I made the decision to come home, and it's one I regret, and I've always regretted it, because I felt afterwards I'd left him. But after meeting with Lee, and that was my first question to her, and spending that time, then I was reassured that Daniel wasn't by himself. And what had happened afterwards, in those hours after we left. But then I thought, well, why hadn't we thought about it? Why don't people ever think about organ donation? But I suppose more importantly is the other side of it. It's a transplant, because you're more likely to need a transplant. But I didn't know anybody that had a transplant. I hadn't heard of anybody needing a transplant. because back in 2007, you know, there was no Facebook, so there was, or Instagram, there was no stories that filter through that you read now. So the committee, I believe, had been set up a few months before that meeting, and they asked would I like to go on the committee as a layperson. So from that, in my head, the one thing that we needed to do was get people talking. Facebook had started then. So the first page I set up was just called Organ Donation. I think it's just Organ Donation. And it went out to my friends. And all of a sudden, quite quickly, the page grew. And I realised that I could do more with this. So then was Organ Donation Isle of Man, the Gift of Life, set up a new page, and people started sharing it. I was obviously able to share Daniel's story, and quite quickly I had a transplant story, a couple of transplant stories that I could share, and then more donor stories. And the more that people saw that it does happen over here, you can donate your organs over here, because a lot of people said to me, well, but you can't do it over here. That was the first sort of hurdle, was, you know, letting people know you can do it over here. They will receive the same care as they would do in the UK. And the more information that I had with the likes of Pam, and Abby was able to give information, and from going to the committee meetings, then the more information I could put out, the more people were interested. And so it was just to encourage people to talk about it, to think about it, because we hadn't. And finding yourself in that position, being told that somebody has passed away, especially one of your children, which is your worst nightmare, and you think that's never going to happen, but it does happen, and it did happen. And for us, we were able to make that decision quite easily. But I can also understand how, if we couldn't have done, or one of us had agreed and the other one hadn't, that Daniel actually, he would be gone completely, because we'd have said no in the end if one of us couldn't agree, because it is, you know, it's a scary, it's a traumatic time, and it's so easy to have said no. But if we'd have said no, I know that's not what Daniel would have wanted. And also,
Did he talk to you about organ donation?
no, well, that's it, you see, we hadn't talked about it, and Daniel would be gone completely. But I still have part of Daniel, not with me, obviously, but 3 people somewhere, you know, are alive today because of him. And he was so healthy and young, that what a waste it would have been.
Yeah.
And so being able to help somebody else was, it's such a comforting thought. But I understand if I was that person in that position again, you know, you don't know how you're going to react, how you're going to feel. So that's why.
And everybody's unique, so it'll be different for
Well, that's it. And, you know, if one of my children now had said, you know, they didn't want to, then it's respecting and honouring that person's last wishes. And we all have the, you know, we're all able to do that. We're all able to make our own minds up and share it.
Yeah, and have the conversations. So Pam, when the questions that really came through were about what happens, like, for example, if somebody has a crash and dies in the car crash, can their body be used for organ donations? So if they arrive already deceased, and how much do doctors actually have time-wise before organs are no longer of use?
If somebody actually has an accident and they die at the scene, unfortunately those organs won't be able to be used at this time. They could go on and donate the corneas, because that's could be coming in. Some places will do donate skin or bones and things. At the moment on the Isle of Man we can't do that. If it was an accident, what the special needs organisation would need to do, would need to get in touch with the coroner to get permission, you know, if somebody dies after an accident or unfortunately taking their own life, you know, if it's going to be a police matter or a coroner's matter, we would need to get permission from the coroner before we could proceed with organ donation. But unfortunately, we won't be able to take those organs if they've come in, that they've already died.
I think there's a misconception that you probably could still do that. So I think that was a good question that somebody asked me. So thank you for that. I think you've covered this one really, but obviously their question is, well, you know, how do doctors know you're truly dead before they take the organs away? But
what they do is, if just to clarify, if somebody comes into hospital, they would normally and they're going to be prospective organ donor, there'll be an intensive care unit, they'd be on a breathing machine called a ventilator. We would be supporting the person, and what happens is that it might be that they had hypoxic brain injury due to a head injury or something like that. We would do neurological brain testing, but before we would do that, we do everything we can to save the life. As I said, it would only be when it becomes futile, then we would then stop all sedation, do neurological testing, which is a set of tests that we have to do, and it's 2 independent doctors that would do that. One is normally consultant, one is normally 5 years post registration trained, and they have to follow a complete set of standards of investigations, of testing the patient to see that they don't have any neurological response at all. And it's only when they've got no neurological response that we would class them as being dead. And that would be the time of death.
Sorry, the family gets to watch.
The family can watch.
Okay.
Yeah, and they can observe the tests as we're doing them, and they can, you know, we would explain to them what we were doing and why we were doing it.
yeah, right. Thank you very much. So what happens when you need to approach a family in these circumstances?
Normally we would get in touch with the special needs for organ donation, and the approach is normally done by the SNOD who comes across from the northwest to the island. They would normally do the approach to the family because they're the experts. They can answer questions that maybe we might not be able to. Quite often families will approach us at the time and say, oh, they were a donor, they signed up to be a donor, we'd like them to be a donor. If they approach us, we would answer their question, explain that we would get this special needs for organ donation to come across to have a chat with them, and they would go through a consent with them to see which organs they would like donated. It's handy if the person has actually been on the register, signed to say what organs that they would like to give, because it is the family's final choice. Reason being is that the patient might have changed their mind and we might not know, or they might have not had the chance to, at the time, revoke their decision at that time.
So let's just talk a little bit about this new this new law that we have got about now you have to opt out rather than opt in. But we all know that the family can still put a stop to anything if they do not know. And the importance it is actually for us to have conversations with our loved ones about what we actually want. Where do they, you know, so let's imagine that they have that conversation, and where do they go to register that this is what they want to do? Do they just go to their own GP and say, put this on my medical records, or how do we go about that?
We have deemed consent now, so that means everybody has consented to be an organ donor, apart from this people who hasn't got mental capacity,
Under 18.
Under 18.
Excuse me.
And there's one more, and I've just forgotten it.
But it pops in.
It will pop in. So,
It's if they haven't been
on the island for
visitor.
12 months, if they haven't lived on the Isle of Man for 12 months. So if they're a visitor to the island, they won't be classed as having deemed consent. We would need to ask if they would be a donor.
Right.
So everybody else would be classed as deemed, that they have deemed consent, and they automatically be a donor. But if somebody does want to say what their wishes are, either way, then they can actually go on to the NHSBT website to actually sign up to say that they still want to be a donor and what organs they'd like to donate, or they can go to our website.
Go to the www.organdonationIOM.com.
Okay, I'll pop that at the end of this little chat of ours, because I think it is so important that, you know, we do definitely have these conversations and our wishes are met rather than...
That's the most important thing, is to discuss your wishes with your loved ones, whether it's to donate or not to donate. That's the most important thing, is to talk to your loved ones
Because
and
they're less
express your
likely
wishes.
to go against if they know.
Yeah, that's what you want, rather than in the state of being asked when they're in shock of losing you.
And I think it's important to say that when somebody is going to be a donor, when they leave the intensive care unit, they will leave on the ventilator if they've decided that the neurological tests were, you know, positive, and they would go into theatre, and it's like they were having an operation. All the respect and dignity is maintained, you know, and the patient can come back to the intensive care unit, and families can come and see them, and they can be with them until they go into theatre, and also as soon as they come out of theatre, they can come and be with them.
That's very good, very good. Here on the Isle of Man, where we're talking today, there is a small amount of people that are waiting for transplants. As of August 2025, around 14 people were waiting for organ transplants on the Isle of Man. A national waiting list, including the Isle of Man, is 8,257, and where around 4,500 transplants take place each year, according to the National Health Organ Donation. Hundreds die waiting, which is around 463 people last year. So we know it's important for these queues to come down, but it's not like a first come, first served. As Pam has explained, there's matching that needs to be done. So how many lives do you think can potentially be saved by what you ladies have brought to the forefront?
Well, each donor can save up to 9 people. We would never know that figure. That is going to be down to people thinking about it themselves, thinking about what they would like if they needed a transplant, because, as I've said, the more people need transplants than you would ever people donating their organs, because donating your organs has got to be in such specific circumstances that it's only about 1% of people, I think, that die in a position that they could donate their organs. Where transplant, you know, anybody could end up needing a transplant, and that's what you've got to think. If I needed a transplant, then it's not automatic you're going to get it, and people die.
Well, that's leading on nicely to the next bit, which is about the recipient's perspective of this. I mean, as you girls know, my late husband was waiting for a liver transplant, and I think it's probably more common than you think that people just think it's something that can be tapped into and it'll be there. But we know the reality is quite the opposite, and you know, you guys have explained that extremely well, and the more that I've been listening to you guys about all of this, it's just, yeah. So when we were going through that whole process, which was, as you say, we went through Liverpool Royal, and the lady that was saying to us was extremely kind, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is actually going to be happening. And of course then you've got that recipient guilt that can come with this as well, that because you know that somebody somewhere is dying so that you can live. How do you help people manage those days, and What support do you give to people in the charity with that?
I personally haven't. I look after the donor side. I have met people that are waiting for transplants, and one in particular that sticks to my mind, and I could do absolutely nothing for them apart from listen, and really sort of that's where it hit home, because he was only 10 months old. So the first person that I ever met that was waiting for a transplant was a 10-month-old baby, and I remember putting him on my knee and he was yellow. And, you know, his parents, obviously they'd found themselves in this position, that being told that their little one needed a, you know, transplant. And so I could do nothing, talk to them. And although nothing that I was doing was going to help them necessarily, but my promise to them was I will keep encouraging people to talk about it, because this little fella wasn't going to be the only one that was going to need a transplant. But, you know, looking at for being a parent, watching my son die and watching them as parents, knowing that he would die without a transplant, and what it must be like to... Daniel couldn't be helped, I know that. I watched all of the tests and everything they did, but this little one could be helped if he got a transplant, and he did go on to get a transplant.
Oh, thank God for that.
No, and he is. I think he's about 14 now.
Oh my God! Sorry,
But
I've hit the mic.
He, you know, but imagine being told that we can save you, but only if a liver becomes available.
Yeah.
And that is it, isn't it? Yeah. So I personally am on talk to the donor families and do what I can to support them. Transplant side, as a charity now, we are supporting them as in any financial help. If they've had a transplant within the last 6 months or they're waiting for transplant, we are offering some financial help to them, and we'd encourage them to get in touch. And, you know, we would be led by them in regards to, like you say, what can we do to help them. If they wanted some sort of counselling, this is where looking into that, and some support with another gentleman who's going to be doing some walking for wellness with small groups. But we need to hear from them. So, well, you know, me personally on the transplant side, because I'm not going to come across them, you know, unless they come to me. But as a charity, we'll do anything we can to help either transplant those waiting for transplant or
the other side.
Yeah,
that's
and
great.
some things that we've been thinking about doing is looking at offering some counselling also for donor families, because they've gone through a trauma.
They have,
and also the recipients with the survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
So we're looking at offering some counselling sessions for them. We've also been talking about setting up some support groups, obviously individual ones initially, but we do actually have the memorial service this Saturday in December at St George's Church, which brings donor families and transplant recipients together, you know, to celebrate, you know, the gift of life and those who's received the gift as well. So that's one thing. That was the first step that we've done. And there's probably about anyone between 100 130 people attend that service. It's a lovely service, isn't it? And that we do actually have the Special Nurse of Organ Donation come to the Isle of Man, and they can actually talk to the families as well, you know, and they can ask to, if when they come back to the island, our Special Nurse for Organ Donation comes across once a month, so families can actually say, can we meet with them to discuss things? We've looked at memory boxes and other things to support families as well. There's a few things that we're looking at, but if anybody's got any ideas, please just support, get in touch.
Well, I mean, like you've already shared that you've had letters from people that have received parts of Daniel and now live. So how did that help you? So that if a recipient is listening to this, they can listen to how it has affected.
I would say it's so important. Those letters are so important because those were my connection and proof that Daniel was still, living on, and he'd helped others. They are. I mean, the NHSBT will vet them before they get sent on to you. They're sent in a plain envelope inside another envelope with a covering letter from NHSBT telling you what's in the envelope, and it's your decision then if you want to open it. But it's to know that somebody has walked their daughter down the aisle, that somebody's been able to go on holidays, meet their grandchildren, all the things that we all take for granted and think is going to happen. But if it hadn't been for Daniel, for these 3 that are still alive, then would that have happened for them? And it is just that connection with them. I have never felt the need to meet them.
No.
I've never taken it to that next stage. You can, and I know people that have, but for me, I didn't feel I needed to. So the letters are in Daniel's memory boxes, and it's probably about 2 or 3 years since I looked at them, to be honest. I know where they are. I do ask for an update every sort of 5 years to see how they're doing, and I go through an HSBT. And that's the other thing, that people out there, we can help them get that update. Some people don't know that you can, but if they get in touch with me, then I will pass it on to the team, and they will get the update on the recipients. And
Is that kind of something on the form you sort of signed to say, I want to keep in contact?
Normally the specialist nurse for organ donation will do a follow-up call with the family, and they will ask at that time, because they'll also mention about, we do actually have a organ donation memorial garden, at Nobles Hospital. And they'll ask them about, would they like a stone in the garden, and give them the guy's contact for that.
Yes, I've seen that. It's nice.
We've actually had 3 donors in the last year, less than a year.
Since the opt-out law 1st of January.
You've had 3 donors?
I think one was December, wasn't it? Just before.
One just before.
Yeah. So there's new stones going to be going in the garden in a couple of weeks. So, but as I say, I think that those letters, and I feel for people, because I've met people and I've read stories from people who've never heard any more, and they feel hurt.
Yes.
I think it's just, I can only imagine how hard it is for the recipient to write. It doesn't have to be a lot on that first letter, just acknowledge it. For that family.
No, I think that's a really lovely touch. You may not want to do it straight away, but to be able to, there's people that haven't been able to do it, if maybe they could go to where you've just said and they can find that information.
I have just found the leaflet which gives advice on how to write to your donor family. So I'm going to share that on Facebook again.
That's good.
So they give you advice on how to do it.
Make sure you tag me in that.
Yeah, will do.
Okay, so what would you say to somebody that possibly has never had that conversation with their family and are a little bit worried about how it's going to be received?
If you go on to NHSBT website, which has the answers to all of the questions, it actually gives you advice on how to start that conversation. On how to approach it. I'm going by how well received everything's been over the last few years and how many people actually have registered now. I hope it would be an easier conversation to bring up.
I think it's just having it, isn't it, rather than building it up in your mind. What's it going to be like?
And I think with the opt-out, that is actively encouraging you, and there's so much about the opt-out that you would hope it would make it a little bit easier for people to bring up.
So how did you two get together in the first place then? or was it, you know,
Through the committee, wasn't it?
Yeah, through the committee, right? You're a
So when
fantastic
I
team.
joined the committee. I've been doing this, I think it's 15 years this
Yeah.
year. I think Daniel's been gone for 19, so I think it's 14, 15 years this year. And and Pam's.
That's incredible, and the work that you've done and what you've in Daniel's Law has been amazing. How do you think he'd feel now of knowing about Daniel's Law?
He'd be made up. He would. He'd be smiling from ear to ear because he just. When the accident first happened, we got a memory book and we took it into school, and the stories that were coming out about how he'd helped people, and one of them, which sticks in my mind, was a girl was getting bullied, and he was taking her to class and making himself late so that she didn't get bullied. And somebody else was, and he offered to give them £10 or £20 to leave his friend alone. So the fact that he was able to help someone, he would love that. And of course, to have a law named after him, yeah, he'd be in his element. And it's, you know, his legacy will live on. So yeah, he'd be made up.
And sort of like, ironically, Di won't remember, but I looked after Daniel when he came in to critical care before we transferred him over to Pendlebury Children's Hospital.
Right.
So we only
So we met
chatted
before,
about
but yeah.
We actually met before the committee.
Yeah,
Before we
yeah.
met each other on the
didn't
committee.
remember.
You would
No,
not
no,
remember
you
that.
wouldn't.
But
Well, this
yeah.
is the thing, really.
Yes,
At that
yeah.
time, you're in another.
You're traumatised.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
are. You're in another
absolutely.
space and time to anybody else,
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
any of these hard questions that you kind of feel you're being asked, you don't want to answer them right there and then.
No.
So please, please, please go home and speak to your loved ones about organ donation. Make sure everybody knows what your plan is. Sign up wherever you need to sign up, and if there's anything else that you want to share today that I haven't actually brought up.
If anybody wants us to come into their workplace, we go into workplaces and we do talks, tell Daniel's story, and we have a recipient story, and Pam covers the medical side, which sometimes, you know, for people to be able to ask those questions and know the answers before they have the conversations, you know, it makes a difference, I think. Knowledge is power, isn't it?
It is, yes. And an understanding, like, if you do die in an accident outside of the hospital, that you actually can't be used. Yeah. That's kind of sad too, isn't it? Hopefully we'll have something that can help that along in the future. But ladies, thank you so much for coming along and being a part of this today.
Thank you very much.
And all the information will be at the back of this podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today. Bye now.